boy. Okay, here we go. First video. Yeah. This is what I'm doing with my life. Howdy, hey, howdy do. Welcome to my channel. I did a lot of thinking and wondering on what my first real video on this channel should be. I went back and forth between a few different ideas, thinking that things that I feel like I'm knowledgeable enough to have an opinion on, but eventually I ended up landing on the video that I'm making today. I feel like this is a very relevant conversation to be had for multiple reasons. For one, with all the zoophile freaks that are deciding they're comfy coming forward about their paraphilias. And then for the fact that people who don't know much about furries and what a furry actually is are trying to conflate zoos and furries as similar, if not the same thing. This is false. Some furries do end up being zoophiles. More often than not, zoophiles also identify as furries, but furries aren't by default zoophiles. And for the most part, I'd argue that most furries are not zoophiles and even condemn zoophiles. It's the logic and argument of rectangles. Squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Throwing a little math logic your way for the smart kids in the audience. Obviously, I don't have any actual statistics to prove that point, but based on the massive backlash and condemnation that zoophiles get from the furry community itself, I'd like to think it's a fair assessment to make. So that is my mission and goal for this video. For the people that aren't familiar with the difference between a furry and a zoophile, this video is for you. I will explain the distinction to you in a way that I hope is easy to understand for the general public that isn't involved or super knowledgeable with either community. So with that being said, let's jump into it. What is a furry? The Oxford Languages Dictionary says that a furry is an enthusiast for animal characters with human characteristics, in particular a person who dresses up in costume as such a character or uses one as an avatar online. A furry can also be a word used to describe an anthropomorphic animal character, which for those of you who don't know what an anthropomorphic character is, it's a fictional character that isn't human but has human characteristics. I'd say a good chunk of the cartoon characters you grew up watching or are continuing to watch are anthropomorphic characters in some form or fashion. A street lamp with a human face, all the way to a dog character that walks on two legs, talks, and drinks booze. Those are examples, in fact, of anthropomorphic characters, also usually shortened to anthro. But when people talk about anthro characters, they usually don't tend to think immediately about the characters that aren't animal-themed. Anthro is typically used when discussing animal characters with human characteristics. Now that we've talked about what exactly an anthropomorphic character is, now we can finally get into the actual furries. Furries. What are they? What do they want? What do they do? Are they going to sneak into my room at night and lick my toes and steal my shoes? Furries, as stated from the dictionary definition presented before, are a community of people that are very zealous and enthusiastic about anthropomorphic characters. The furry community is actually pretty diverse in a lot of ways. You have the fursuiters and the fursuit creators, the content creators, the artists. It's actually a very broad community full of lots of creative and rather inclusive people. Furry community is known for being very diverse in not just content, but the type of people that are a part of it as well. Furries have been notoriously inclusive to people of any ethnicity, sexuality, gender identification, etc., etc. Of course, every community has its rotten eggs, but I'd say for the most part, it's a very fun and supportive community. And I know what you might be asking yourself, or at least one of the questions you might be asking anyway, being, what about the sexy side of furries? Yes, there is a subgenre of the fandom that dwells in the pits of NSFW, but that's with any fandom, I suppose. I used to be a member of that subgenre once upon a time, actually. Don't bother trying to find that art account, it has been deleted, and I do not get enjoyment out of drawing lewd things anymore. But I don't really have a problem with the NSFW furry art, as long as it's done and distributed responsibly. As I would ask of any other fandom out there, honestly. But yes, the sexy degenerates do exist in the fandom, as they do in any. I have come to notice that when people typically think of furries, they think of the sexual side of it all. They tend to hear the word furry and their sexual deviant alarms in their heads start going off. There are plenty of furry content creators and artists out there that are in the fandom purely for non-sexual reasons, myself being one of them. But once again, there's nothing wrong with the sexual and NSFW side of it either, just to make that absolutely clear. But that is a pretty basic bare-bones summary of what a furry is and what the community consists of. Now let's talk about zoophiles. What is a zoophile? Oxford Languages Dictionary defines a zoophile as a person who is sexually attracted to animals. Zoophiles, unlike furries, are very much attracted to real or commonly described as feral animals. No, human characteristics, just plain old animals that you would see out and about every day. There's not really much to it to dive into or explain here. It's pretty dry cut. They're just people that are attracted to straight up real life animals. Can't get any clearer than that. Zoophilia is a paraphilia, which is, also defined by Oxford Languages Dictionary, a condition characterized by abnormal sexual desires typically involving extreme or dangerous activities, while being a furry is more so a way of life and can translate into your creative hobbies and isn't inherently sexual. Being a zoophile is purely sexual in nature. So that leads us to, why are furries okay and not zoophiles? There are a few factors in play when it comes to the difference between furries and zoophiles, but let's break it down step by step. For starters, as stated before, being a furry isn't inherently based on sexuality. You don't have to have an attraction to anthropomorphic characters to be a furry. Even just having a non-sexual fascination and interest in those types of characters can label you as a furry, which, of course, there's nothing wrong with that in the slightest. Secondly, even touching the sexual side of the furry fandom, the biggest difference between a furry and a zoophile is that a furry's sexual desires are based in fiction and fantasy. Animals that walk on two legs, can speak English, and behave like humans simply do not exist. I'd love for anybody to go out into the world and find an animal in real life that walks on two legs, has human-like anatomy, has cognitive thought, and can talk to you the same way a human can. You can't, because it doesn't exist. Which leads me to my next point. Let's say that anthro animals did exist in the real world. Anthro characters would be able to give consent or not give you consent if you did make a move on them or flirted with them in that way. They are animal characters with human characteristics. A zoophile's sexual preferences, however, are not based in consent. Animals in the real world are not able to give their consent to one who would try to impose themselves onto the animal in that way. Let's look at dogs, which tend to be the most frequently abused creatures within the zoophile/bestialist community. Fully grown, mature dog only has the mental capacity of, at most, a 3 to 4 year old, usually 2 to 3 year old human child. And last time I checked, 2 to 3 year old children are very much not able to give consent. Zoophiles will tend to get caught up in the whole argument of, well, they're sexually mature, so therefore it's okay. That's not the argument we're having, though. It doesn't matter if the animal is physically and sexually mature or not. Humans are physically sexually mature anywhere between the ages of 8 to 13 years old, but they still can't give consent. Why? Because their brains aren't fully developed yet and therefore cannot fully understand the idea of consent and the effects that the certain actions they take could have on them in the future. It was never and will never be about physical maturity. It's mental maturity that is the issue and discussion here, and a dog will never pass the mental maturity of a 2 to 3 year old human. Ergo, a dog could never give consent to a human for sexual intercourse. Hell, even the smartest non-human creature on the planet, the orangutan, has the intelligence of a 3 to 4 year old child, so this logic does apply to creatures outside of just dogs as well. That, and there's the obvious language barrier between a human being and an animal that would prevent proper consent from being given. Zoophiles would like you to believe that there's just basic body language that you can see that could contribute to consent. But I have yet to see a zoophile actually go into depth and explain what that body language that is so obvious actually is, and I have a feeling that they probably never will. Probably because they don't actually know what the body language is and they just want to make the people criticizing them feel stupid when in reality they are the repulsive, disgusting, stupid ones. Furries' sexual interests are based in fiction and consent-giving creatures, while zoophiles' sexual interests are based in real-life creatures that can't give consent. In essence, that is the big difference here that separates the two communities. There are different levels of anthro characters that are debatable on what is appropriate to have a sexual interest toward or not, but that's a video for another time. I could dive into that another day if that's something you'd like to see. But yeah, in terms of staying on topic for the discussion being had here, there's not much else to say on the matter. That's all I've got for you guys this time. I hope I've been able to explain this to you all in a way that makes sense. If this video helped you understand the differences and why furries are okay and zoophiles are not, leave a like and maybe a comment. I can do more little video essays like this if you all enjoy them. And if you are a zoophile watching this, get help and die.